And then we will Tim, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. We'll play this video and then Tim, then you can take it away.
Okay.
Lauren, I can't hear the audio.
Sorry, what did you say, Emily?
You can't hear Jen talking.
Oh, you can't?
I can't.
We can't hear her either.
Okay. Let me figure that out real quick.
Hi, Jackie. I haven't seen you in forever. We have to catch up.
Okay, well, having some technical difficulties and can't quite figure out why you all can't hear the audio on the video. So Tim, I'll just go ahead and pass it off to you to go ahead and start the tasting.
Okay, sounds great. Well, my name is Tim Shumrick. I've been in the wine business for a long, long time here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I started working in the wine business out in Indiana at our family winery. It was called Chateau Pommier. I don't know if any of you have been there or have heard of it. Then I opened a store in East Hyde Park in 1975, and we moved it to O'Brienville in 1985, and I was there until about 8 or 10 years ago that I finally sold it and decided to go to work for other people. And I found out that it was more profitable for me to go work for other people than it was to work for myself, which was a revelation. I thought, wow, I thought I was doing real well, but apparently not as well as working for someone else. And it was a lot easier to work for somebody else. I didn't have all the headaches. So I've been in the wine business for, almost 45 years now. When I started Chateau Pommier, I was 21, and I had gone to New York City and worked for a fellow named Peter Morel for a full summer. And he had one of the bigger stores in Manhattan. And I worked from the ground up there. The first job there was go sweep the basement. Then eventually I worked my way up to the floor. And one day they said, okay, here's an order for you. We want you to fill it. Don't make any mistakes. Like, okay, I'll give it my best. So I get the invoice and I go downstairs to see what wines I have to pick. And I look at the top, and on the top, the name on the top was Johnny Cash. It's like, oh my goodness, you're going to make me go pick his wines? Well, I got by with it just fine, and got all his wines, and went off without a hitch. So I worked there in New York City for a summer, came back to Cincinnati, and then opened Chateau Pommier in East Hyde Park. And then we eventually moved it to O'Brienville. I don't know if any of you came to the Chateau Pommier in O'Brienville. We had a wine store and a restaurant. So we started with the wine store, but always had a little bit of food involved. And then eventually one day, my dad, who was a physician up at UC, ran the ear, nose, and throat department over at the medical school. That he came to me and he said, "Look, let's open up a restaurant." So we opened up a full-scale restaurant, and I hope some of you came there and had dinner and drank some good wine with us. We appreciate it. But restaurant was a hard business, and that's when I decided it was time to get out and go to work for somebody else. Well, with that being said, the wines we have tonight, we have one white and we have three reds. We have a Pinot Gris, which Pinot Gris is the French term for the gray Pinot. In Italy, it would be called Pinot Grigio. In Italy, it tends to be a little to the lighter side, where in France, in the Alsatian region, tends to have more body, a little bit more texture to the wine. And that's what the wine that we'll have tonight tastes like. I don't know if any of you have tried it, but before we get to trying it, or if you've tried it, great, no problem. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about Chateau Ste. Michelle and Columbia Crest Winery. Columbia Crest Winery is owned by Chateau Ste. Michelle, so Ste. Michelle is the parent company. The winery Chateau Ste. Michelle was actually started in 1934, and it was in Woodinville, which is just outside of Seattle. It merged in 1954 with another wine company to become Chateau Ste. Michelle, or the American Wine Company, or National Wine Company, eventually, and then going to Chateau Ste. Michelle. Chateau Ste. Michelle was one of the first wineries in Washington, and they are definitely now the biggest winery in Washington, and they encompass the whole state, getting their grapes from across the whole state. I've always been a big proponent of the Chateau Ste. Michelle brand, and especially the Columbia Crest, for just the value that I think the wines that are made at Columbia Crest represent. That the Merlot was actually the first wine I had from Columbia Crest, the H3 label, and I just fell in love with it. It was under $15. It was wonderful wine, and from there everything just blossomed. The Cabernet, the Luchavo, all their wines have been just spot on as far as the varietal characteristic. Now, as I'm talking, if any of you do have questions, please ask questions. That the only bad question is the one that you're not going to ask, because somebody else may have the same question, but please ask. It makes the wine tasting a lot more informative. So ask questions, please. I want to also go over a tech sheet that one of the reps gave me, and they go over the different things that make the Horse Heaven Hills area of Washington unique. And the topography, the terrain consists of south sloping, well-drained, sandy soils, open and dry. The benefits for that are the south-facing slopes provide excellent sun exposure for grape ripening and good air drainage that protects vineyards during the winter months. And you have to understand that you can only make good wine if you start with good grapes. So you've got to have these benefits in order to make the grapes get to their peak of ripeness. Now, the peak of ripeness doesn't mean that they just have a lot of sugar in them. You have to have the balance of the sugar and the acidity in the grapes in order to have a complete glass of wine, or make the best wine that you possibly can. So that was the topography, the wind. Strong wind patterns up to 30% greater than in other Columbia Valley areas are unique to the Horse Heaven Hills area. What are the benefits to that? The strong winds reduce canopy size and density, creating better sun exposure. So more sun gets into the inside of the vine itself to touch the grapes to help the grapes ripen. An unfavorable environment for vineyard pests. So the pests don't have as many places to hide, either amongst the leaves or on the underside of the leaves. And evens ripening by moderating temperature extremes. And that's another thing we'll talk about in just a minute, is the diurnals. The diurnals are the differences between the daytime heat and the nighttime heat. So you have very warm days, but you have cool nights. So you have the warm days to help the grapes ripen, but you need the cool nights in order to keep the acidity higher in the grapes. So you have better balance, better mouthfeel when you drink the wine. The temperature. Warmer growing season temperatures result in an earlier harvest. What is the benefit? The benefit, grapes are fully mature at harvest with unique characteristics ideal for single vineyards. And an earlier harvest also decreases the risk of fall frost. So once again, warm days, cool nights, but you don't want it so cold that the grapes are hanging until you have frost. So you need those warm days. Precipitation. The annual rainfall averages 9 inches, with the majority accumulated during dormancy, so supplemental irrigation is crucial. And what is the accumulated during dormancy? That's the snowfall that they get in the area, where the snow falls, blankets the earth, and as it melts into the earth and gives the vines the moisture that they need for the spring, so they can get the buds growing, the flowering, the berries set, all to take place. What are the benefits of this? Grape growers have ultimate control over how much and when to irrigate the vineyards. You don't want to irrigate too much. And when you do irrigate, they usually use something called drip irrigation, where they run piping that drops the water right at the base of the vine itself. So they're not watering the weeds. It's going right directly to the vine. One of the unique things about doing that is that the grape growers can then determine when they might want to start to pick. So about a month before they want to start to pick, they turn off the water. When they turn the water off, it sends a message to the vine, okay, vine, time to really ripen your grapes so that we can come in there and we can pick them. Judicious water use prevents excessive vine canopy growth, yielding grapes with balanced characteristics. So those are some of the things that you really want to have when growing grapes in the Horse Heaven Hills area. The Columbia Valley really allows that to happen. Now, in the Horse Heaven Hills area, the area itself is 570,000 acres big. They have 6,000 acres under planted vineyards. The first plantings were in 1972. Elevations run between 200 feet and 1,800 feet. The higher up you go, the cooler, obviously, it gets. The lower the elevation, the warmer it is. So you can even balance out the kind of grapes that you're going to be putting into your blends or into your wines, because you could get Pinot Gris from a lower elevation, maybe have a little more intensity of fruit, a little higher elevation, a little more acidic, so it can balance those two things out. Once again, I said the average rainfall is 9 inches. There are 6 wineries and just a handful of grapes that are grown in that area: Chardonnay, Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah, and the Pinot Gris. So any questions on any of that at all? We're all good? All right. So the first wine that we have tonight.
Tim,
What kind of wine is it?
Tim,
Yeah.
this is Jackie. I sent a question about the relationship between Columbia Crest and Chateau Saint Michel. I don't know if you talked, if I missed that.
The Chateau Saint Michel is the parent company that they own Columbia Crest.
Okay,
I don't know one from another.
thank you.
Okay. So the 2019 Chateau Saint Michel Pinot Gris.
Is this what you would consider typical of a Washington State Pinot Gris?
Absolutely. Now, if you're familiar with an Italian Pinot Grigio, if I have a knock on Italian Pinot Grigio, is that they're always very light. There's not a lot of body to it, where I think the Chateau Saint Michel or the Washington and Oregon areas, since they have warmer days and they have cooler nights, they tend to have a little more body to them, a little more texture and structure. One of the things I've always tried to explain to people is that the texture of the wine is very important, and it's very important for a couple of different reasons. One, I think that your palate knows immediately when you put the wine on there about the viscosity or the texture of the wine. And it sends a message to your brain saying, hey, brain, this has got some body to it. It's thicker, it's more viscous than it is watery. And that's what I like about the Northwestern Pinot Gris. They tend to have texture to them, where a lot of the Italian Pinot Grigios don't have a lot of texture to them. Now, one of the reasons they call it Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio is it means the gray Pinot, but it's actually more red than it is gray. So it's almost a totally red grape. Now, what does that mean as far as winemaking goes? That the difference between making a white wine out of red grapes is that the skins hold all the pigment. So when the grapes go into the winery, they're put into a press and they're pressed. They're not crushed the same way that a red grape would be processed, where the grapes go in, the clusters are put into the press, they're pressed, the juice runs free. It doesn't have contact with the skins, so there's no chance for pigmentation to leach out from the skins into the wine. Where when you take the red grapes in, they're run through a crusher destemmer. It's actually a destemmer crusher. So the grapes are first destemmed off of the cluster, the woody part of the cluster. That's thrown out because that holds tannins in it and bitterness that would be imparted into the wine. Well, after the grapes are taken off of the cluster, they're dropped into a set of gears where the gears then crush the grapes, extracting color immediately from the skins into the juice itself. It's not wine yet because we haven't gone through the fermentation process. So in the white wines, the grapes, the red grapes even, are put into the press. They're pressed, juice runs free. It's put into a stainless steel tank. The fermentation then takes place in the tank itself. The fermentation process is the conversion of the sugars that are in the juice into alcohol by yeast. They can either use yeast that's native to the winery and the vineyard that is stuck onto the grapes themselves, or they can put some type of a manufactured yeast that they put into the juice, and then that will start the fermentation process using the sugars that are in the juice itself to convert the sugars into alcohol. Does everybody understand the process of the fermentation? Any questions on it? Okay. To read the fact sheets, some of the notes on the fact sheets here. Chateau Ste. Michelle Pinot Gris offers fresh flavors of juice and pear, which I definitely get. Anybody get any other flavors out of there? They also mentioned melon. And then an interesting note on here, it says, and a hint of spice. Generally, when they talk about spice in white wines, it might be a little bit of nutmeg or some type of a baking spice, allspice. Anybody get any of those notes?
A tartness,
Yeah,
really,
that's
more
it.
than a spice.
Pardon?
I'm getting a tartness, like a little bit of citricy, not citrus, but just a little tart, almost tingle.
Well, how about look at it as apple, maybe like a green apple and that's what they're trying to do. What you're actually getting, the tartness is caused by the acidity in the wine. So if you didn't have the acidity in the wine, you'd end up with kind of a bland wine. There's no liveliness to the wine. So you want to get a balance between the fruit flavors and acidity to keep it lively and fresh on your palate. When you take the wine onto your palate, you have the viscosity, and that acid at the end cleans off the palate and sets your palate up for the next taste. So it's very important that a wine has enough acid or that tartness to it to clean off your palate and get your palate ready for the next flavor or the next taste, be it food or wine. Now, if you think about it this way, that wine is generally meant to go with food. So, and I've seen some of you munching away, and you've got some cheese or you've got something that some olives or something that might have some oil in it. So when you eat the food, the oil coats the palate. The wine, the acidity in the wine, then cleans off that oil off your palate, allowing you then to have a clean palate for the next taste, be it wine or be it food. Got to have a little bit of that acid in there to clean it up and to keep the wine lively. Any other questions there? What would you pair this with? I personally think you want some type of a lighter food. Obviously, fish would be the first recommendation. But I also think, you have some light type of a chicken or a pork dish, even salads. If you have the correct type of salad, something that doesn't have too much vinegar on it, that would be a great salad to pair with this wine. Vinegar and wine are arch enemies. If you think about what vinegar is made from, it's made from spoiled wine. So vinegar has very high acid structure to it, and you don't want that with a good bottle of wine. So you have to have a light dressing on your salad. You could use lemon juice, you could use lime juice, grape juice. I mean, something with some acidity to it, something that doesn't clash directly with the wine itself.
Sometimes I like having a nice white wine with Chinese food, particularly the ones that come with a very light sauce, like Lugu Gai Pan.
True, true. You know, another thing, another dish using the Oriental theme there would be any of the dim sum. You know, something light. You know, it's not a heavy flavor. You put a little hoisin or a little soy and ginger sauce onto the dim sum. This would be a perfect companion to that.
If I were a sushi eater, that might be good.
Well, it's not sushi. I mean, they're cooked, so it's not raw. It's not raw. It's the dim sum. You know, in the little little pastries.
Yeah, they're like little puffs with different, and they're usually steamed.
Right, either steamed or pan fried. You know, it just depends. You could, if you had spring rolls, like a vegetarian spring roll, would be perfectly fine. Or if you had a spring roll with chicken in it, or something like that, some ground pork would be perfectly fine and a great complement to this wine. Yeah. Any other food ideas that somebody might have?
I'm definitely thinking the fish. That was my first thought before you even said it. I'm thinking snapper, halibut, like something white, light, but with a little bit more flavor.
Yeah, swordfish would be a good one. You know, I believe anything that's not too saucy or too heavy. Now, I've always recommended to people that when you're trying to pair up a food and a wine, you match a power with a power. You know, the old adage, white meat, white wine, red meat, red wine, that's a perfect beginning, but doesn't always tell the whole story. So sometimes you have to match up those powers. If you did a chicken piccata, this would be good with the chicken piccata, where you've got just a simple dusting, the chicken breast is sauteed, some capers, a little bit of white wine in there, a little butter, perfect. So you've got a light dish and you've got a lighter style wine. If you wanted to go something with a cream sauce, then you'd have to elevate that maybe into some type of a Chardonnay, or even move it off into a red wine. But sticking with the white wine theme, light dishes, light wines, heavier dishes that call for white wine, then you need heavier white wines. I'm making myself hungry now, again.
Okay. Sometimes I like to think about the white wine being a clean complement to the cream sauce, and your comment about cleaning your palate makes sense.
Yeah, it's what it's set up to do. That the food will help bring out the fruit flavors in the wine, but then the wine cleans the palate. And you know, I've done hundreds, if not I've done thousands of wine tastings, and that's always been one of my driving points: is that use the wine to complement the food, but then for the wine to clean off that palate, to set your palate up. And that could be a white wine or it could be a red wine. Doesn't make any difference which one, but you got to have enough acidity to keep the palate clean. Any other questions? Have any of you ever been out to Chateau Ste. Michelle or Columbia Crest or to Washington? And that's one of the areas of the world I haven't been to. I've been to California a bunch of times. I've never made it north. That's my next trip. Okay.
but apparently you don't want to go in the fall because that seems to be fire season.
Absolutely. Right after that nice, warm, hot summer, when everything when there's no rain and everything dries out. You know, one of the beauties, though, or protections that a vineyard has out there is during fire season, vineyards are green, so the vineyards don't burn. What happens is your outside rows, if they're next to forests or some kind of scrub, they'll get burned, but the interior grapevines don't. The problem they have is when you get these massive fires that produce so much smoke, the smoke sticks to the outside of the grape. If you look at a grape has a white coating on the outside. Well, that's a waxy coating, and it's a waxy coating so that when rain falls onto the grape itself, the rain runs off and it doesn't collect or pool so that molds and mildews don't grow on the grapes. It's a natural defense mechanism by the grape. Next time you go to Kroger, pick up a red grape and look at it. There's a white coating on it, or if you've got grapes there, just rub your hand on it and you can wipe it right off. So it's just that waxy coating. But during the fires, the smoke sticks to the grapes. Then when you've got the smoke taint on the grapes themselves, there's no way to get it out of there. Once it's on, it's on. The wineries that burn down are the picturesque wineries that are nestled up into the woods, and then the brush that's underneath there burns, and then the wineries, a lot of them are made out of wood. They have some kind of wood siding, then they burn. But the vines themselves, the vines come through pretty well. And if you think about it, if they're irrigated, they can always put water onto the ground and onto the vines. So that'll diminish some of the effects of the fire also. Questions? Thoughts again? Okay. The first red wine I want to taste the Merlot. And I want to taste the Merlot because the Luchavo is a blend, and it'll have some of the Merlot. It's predominantly Merlot in it, but other wines or other grape varieties are added to it. So let me see what it's the blend. There is no blend on this. This is 100% Merlot. Now on the Merlot, the bottle has the purple swoosh on it. Horse Heaven Hills. How did Horse Heaven Hills get its name? There was a cowboy that was out, he's actually a rancher, was out tending to his flock of horses, and he was in the area. And this is back in the mid to late 1800s. And he went to sleep one night, and apparently the herd had gone up the hill into the valleys, up in the mountains, and he went up and he found them. They weren't trying to get away or anything, but he went up and found the herd, and he goes, "Boy, this must be horse heaven here." Well, it just stuck as Horse Heaven Hills, and it's been called Horse Heaven Hills ever since. Now, as I explained earlier, the position of the hills faces south. Interesting, and here's how we'll connect these dots, is that, did you know that this area of Ohio used to be the biggest grape growing area in the country. And why was this the biggest grape growing area in America at one time? Well, it's because of the position of Ohio being on the northern side of the Ohio River, and our slopes then face to the south. They don't grow grapes in northern Kentucky because the hills face to the north. That they don't get as much sun exposure as if when the hills are facing south. So you have better ripening on a south-facing slope, and the Horse Heaven Hills area faces to the south. So you get much more sun exposure. You get more flavor, more intensity of flavor in your wines. So the 2016 growing season on the Merlot, it says here, it had the best of both worlds with a hot spring and early summer. Then as summer went on and it got closer to picking season, it became cooler than normal towards the end of the growing season. So you have great ripening and great flavor development with the warm weather, but then you have that cool weather behind it to keep the acids high. This weather we're having here in Cincinnati right now is exactly what they want to have in any grape growing area in the world. They want that nice warm day, 80, 85 degrees, but then they want the temperature at night to drop down into the mid 50s or 50 degrees. They like that big swing in the diurnal. The diurnal is the difference between the daytime heat and the nighttime coolness. So they want to see that so that the acidity stays high. It keeps the grapes cleaner. A lot of your California wines have gone through, they let the grapes hang for a long, long time. And what happens with the grapes is the grapes and the sugars and the acids, they have an inverse relationship. So when the grapes are just forming on the vine itself, the grapes are green, they have very high acid, like a green apple. But then as the summer goes on, the sugars start to rise and the acids start to fall. Well, in California, they leave the grapes on so that the acids go way low, and you tend to get that jammy quality in your wines because you have very, very ripe grapes. You have high sugar levels, which translate into high alcohol levels in the 14.5, 15, 15.5, possibly 16% alcohol, which I think is a kind of excessive, but the wineries are driven by what the consumers want, and they want the low acid wines that they can open tonight, drink and enjoy, and not have to worry about any of the acidity or any of the bitterness that goes along with having grapes picked maybe a little earlier, so you have a little higher tannin or a little higher acid level in your wines. I'm sure some of you have noticed that that some of the wines, they're just big jammy wines. Well, it sells. In Europe, they want that balance between the flavor and the acids. Now let's talk about the Merlot for just a little bit. Merlot is a grape variety mainly planted in the Bordeaux area of France. Why do they use the Merlot? Merlot is a lot like the Cabernet, but let's look at Cabernet. Let's give each one a sex. Cabernet is male, the Merlot is female. And what do I mean by that? The Cabernet tends to be full-bodied, a little aggressive, a little more tannic than the Merlot. The Merlot has very ripe fruit. It's a little softer, more velvety, smoother. silkier textured than the Cabernet. And that's what I like about the H3 Merlot. It has full flavor, but yet very, very, very drinkable, very smooth all the way across the palate. Has some tannin, and tannin is that bitter component. Tannin is found in the seeds of the grape, a little bit in the pips on the end of the grapes. And you want some tannin. Tannin helps give the wine longevity or ageability. So if you bought the 2016 tonight and you left it sit for a couple of years, you know what? You'd be rewarded in a couple of years with a much more elegant bottle of wine. The tannins, as they age, they tend to soften and solidify and fall out as sediment. So if you have aged wine, you see some sediment in there. It's the pigments and some of the acids, and tannin is an acid, solidifying and falling out. And that's why aged wine is so sought after, that it has a gracefulness to it. And that's why the California wineries now try to have high sugars, low acids, excuse me, so that the drinkability is right now, that you don't have to age it out. Everybody's tried the Merlot. What do you think? Give me some of your thoughts on it.
Well, I like it a lot, but I would also think it's a little on the jammy side when I first put it in my mouth, and then it softens out some.
Mm-hmm. Now, its alcohol level is 14.5%, which is a little high. Remember where it's coming from. Coming from the Horse Heaven Hills, very warm area, 9 inches of rain, hot days, cool nights.
We both think it's dry, a little dry, which I like because sometimes Merlot doesn't have enough depth for me, so I like the dry factor.
Right. You know, at 14.5, it better be dry. You know, and what you mean by that is that all the sugars have been used to create the alcohol. There's no residual sugar. Let's see, they don't even put on here any residual sugar facts. So there is no residual sugar. But yes, and I can see where at 14.5, where you do get a jamminess, but at the same time, it is dry. Now, Jamie, when you say it's dry, is it bitter dry? It's still drinkable.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to drink. In fact, there doesn't seem to be a high acidity to it, so just dry without the acid.
You know, one thing you might want to try is take a bite of food and then try the wine.
I can do that.
Okay,
I
great.
can do that.
And you'll see where the food will help take some of that dryness, should take some of that dryness out of the wine and bring the fruit flavor of the wine forward.
Very good. We like it.
I feel like I'm getting a little bit of pepper in it.
A little bit of pepper? Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely. But remember, earlier I said that, you know, giving the Merlot grape a sex, female, so it's a little softer, more delicate than Cabernet. That, you know, Cabernet, I think I describe it as the boy that wants to run around and fall down and skin his knee. Where I think the Merlot is just so graceful, so much more elegant than Cabernet.
The very first taste I had of it made me think of chocolate. It didn't taste like chocolate. The brain went there.
Cocoa is definitely an attribute with Merlot or Cabernet, that they definitely have that cocoa type flavor to them sometimes. And that's from the grape itself, but then also from aging the wine in barrels. Now, I'm glad you said that, because 66% of the wine was aged in older oak. 34% saw new oak. And it was aged for 15 months. So if you think about the barrels themselves, that they toast the inside of the barrels, so they're caramelizing the sugars on the inside of the barrels, so you get a little bit of that cocoa flavor out of the inside of the barrels into the wine itself. The older barrels, they don't give you anything. They give you very, very little as far as flavors that are put into the wine. But one of the things that the barrels do is wood is porous, so oxygen flows in and out of the wood itself. And that oxygen helps give the wine more texture. It gives the wine a different mouthfeel than if it was aged in stainless steel. Red wines also go through a process called malolactic fermentation, where malic acid is the initial acid in the wine. And when they let it go through the malolactic fermentation, the malic acid is converted into lactic acid. So malic acid is what you find in a green apple. Excuse me. Lactic acid is what you find in milk and butter. So that tends to make it a little creamier on the palate if it didn't go through the malolactic fermentation. Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts on the wine itself?
Well, I like this wine, and I want to know how come it doesn't cost more.
You want to know what?
I thought it was a very reasonable price point, under $20, and I think how do they make it so inexpensively?
That's a great question, and I don't think we better pose that with them out there in Washington, because maybe they'll raise the price on us. So we're not gonna go there and do that. No, I think what happens is they've got these expanses of land that they've owned for a long time that didn't cost a lot of money to begin with, so they can continue to produce grapes at a relatively inexpensive cost. And I agree. The Horse Heaven Hills wines, they have been a staple wherever I've gone in my wine life. I've always had them with me because they over deliver at that price point. And it's what, you have friends over, you don't mind opening that second or third bottle. If you have good friends over and it's 25 or 30 bucks, maybe you're going to do one bottle, not two. But this at under 15, yeah, you're like, yeah, you want more? Let's go for it.
So is this fairly widely available?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I hate to say that you can go to Kroger and get it, but because I don't want to lose any sales here, but if you're in a pinch, you might find it on their shelf. I think any good wine store should have that wine in their portfolio. It's just that good at that dollar point. Any other questions? All right, let's move on to Luchavo the Horse. Now, one thing you'll notice right away is look at the vintage on this. The Merlot 2016, Luchavo 2015. Would you bring me that glass of water? Right here to your right, yeah. Got a little frog in the throat. So, Luchavo. The blend on Luchavo is 75% Merlot, 17% Syrah, 7% Malbec, and 1% other red varieties. What does that mean? They may have a little extra Cabernet or some other type of a red grape that they put in there as a filler. Now, why do you blend different grapes? One of the ways, or red wines, one of the reasons I've tried to explain to people is you have to look at each variety of grape as its own block of Swiss cheese. So you cut a block, you cut a slice off each block, and you lay one piece over the other. Well, Swiss cheese has holes all throughout it, but as you layer the Swiss cheese on top of each other, you're filling in the holes. So where Merlot may not have the body that the winemaker wants, they want to add a little more body, then they put the Syrah and the Malbec in there. Or the Syrah, very small grape, really heavily pigmented. They want a little bit darker color. And I think you'll note that there's a little darker color with the Luchavo versus the Merlot, that you're adding that little extra from the Syrah to it for the color. One variety might be a little low on acid, on the acidity. So they put that in there to bump up the acidity. So blends are good things. And I would bet that when you pick up a bottle of wine, a Cabernet from California or from Washington, I'll bet there's probably a little of something else in there. Very seldomly do you see a wine like the Horse Heaven Hills Merlot, where it's a 100% variety. They try to put something else in there to compensate for any of the shortcomings that the Merlot might have. Okay, to go down this one, the 2015 vintage was one of the warmest growing seasons on record in Washington. Alcohol in this one, 14.5. That's indicative of a warm summer. The warm temperatures continue this through the spring and summer, moderating slightly into fall and extending an early harvest. Overall, 2015 saw very favorable growing conditions, producing optimal ripening across varieties and yielding outstanding wines throughout the region. Well, what they're really talking about there is they've got wines with lots of concentration. One of the things you have to look at is that rain is a good thing and it can be a bad thing. That if it rains right before harvest, the grapevine itself acts like a sponge and it sucks up as much water as it possibly can, because its purpose in life is to stay alive, to create more grapes, to have the species continue on and on. So when the water hits the ground, it's in a dry area, that vine sucks up the water. Well, where does it put it? It doesn't have pockets or pots or pools or places to put it, but it has grapes. So it puts it into the grapes, and if it rains right before harvest, you now have a dilution of the grape juice that is inside the grape itself. You want small berries with a lot of skin, so you have a large skin to juice ratio, so that when you do crush the grapes, you tend to have a lot of pigment and a lot of flavors in the juice because you don't have a lot of water. Now, one thing you should notice about this wine, little deeper smell, little more earthy possibly. Let's see if they tell us this red blend is focused and generous, open textured, inviting, offering cherry, currant, red plum, and raspberry jam flavors. I think the Merlot gives you a lot of that, but I also think the Syrah gives you a lot of that. As I said earlier, Syrah is a very small grape, high color, high pigmentation, but can be very ripe and give you that jammy quality. Let's just say it has a lot of black fruit flavors to it. Says here,
How much flavor comes from the skin?
well, you get some flavor from the skin. Obviously, most of it comes from the meat of the grape itself. What you really get from the skin is you get the color from the skin. When you ferment, they fermented this for 6 to 10 days. So that means that the juice and the skins are together for 6 to 10 days, just depending on what variety that they're fermenting. On the Merlot, the Merlot was fermented, I think, 14 days. Yeah, the Merlot was fermented for between 7 and 14 days. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to extract as much color out of the skins as they possibly can, and other phenolics that are in the grape themselves. They try to extract as much as they possibly can. Once they've gotten to a point where they feel they've gotten as much as they can, then they'll take the skins or the juice off the skins so there's no more contact with the skins themselves. The skins give you mainly acidity, gives you color, gives you some phenolics or flavors. But the inside of the grape, the meat of the grape, is where you get most of your flavor. Now, the next time you go to the store, or if you have grapes around, red grape around the house, bite the grape and look at the inside of the grape. The inside of the grape will sometimes be green. But you shouldn't say sometimes. Most of the time, it's green. So all the color generally comes from the skins themselves. What do you see as a difference between these two grapes or these two wines? I think what you should see is you should see a lot more depth in this wine versus the Merlot. And now it's just a style preference. Which do you like? Do you like the softer style of the Merlot? You like it a little fuller, like Luchavo? Do you see the contrast between the two?
This wine wants a steak.
It was what?
The wine needs a steak.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. And you're all sitting there with food. I'm sitting here with nothing. I have an apple. But I will be going home. And there's definitely going to be a steak in the dinner tonight. Oh, that's just not fair.
That was a slice of roast beef. I thought red wine needed meat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Red wine, it needs meat or a good cheese. Nice brie or Saint Andre or something like that. I
have often thought that people are a little snobby about it has to be 100% and it shouldn't be blended. But we've often found blended whites more flavorful.
Well, that's why they blend it. Exactly why they blend it. And In Europe, there are certain areas where you aren't allowed to blend, but in Bordeaux, they do it all the time. Well, Bordeaux is one of the most expensive wines in the world. Well, I mean, maybe they're onto something. The rest of the world needs to understand that. I think going 100% tends to limit the wine sometimes because every vintage is different. So the grapes didn't create the color you wanted, or they didn't create the acidity you wanted, didn't create as much flavor as you wanted. Or another variety, if you added it to it, fills that gap.
Well, your Swiss cheese analogy is very good.
Well, it's the only way that if you have customers who don't understand why you would blend, that's just, you put the Swiss cheese on top of each other because you want to create as solid a block of cheese or wine that you possibly can. Now, what are you doing there? You want the best that you can possibly produce. So blending, I think, is the way to do that. It is the way to do it.
Now, Tim, I have to show my ignorance about wine. A few years ago, or a decade ago, we were lucky enough to go to France, and I did not realize that champagne is a blended wine. And this young person giving us a tour explained that to me, and it was, I was like, sacre bleu. Oh, no wonder they can reproduce it, because they're doing exactly, they're filling all the holes in your Swiss cheese.
Absolutely. And did you know that champagne is made from 2 red grapes and 1 white grape? So you use the Pinot Noir and the Pinot Meunier, which are red grapes, and the Chardonnay is the white grape. And most champagne is white.
The day we did the champagne tasting, we did it on a relatively empty stomach, and they were very generous. And our next adventure that day was climbing to the top of a cathedral. So we stopped and ate at a McDonald's just to have food.
Now that's not fair. You shouldn't have done that. You're in France. You got to go get a loaf of bread and a hunk of cheese. Any other questions?
Tim,
we want you to...
Oh, Tim, what's your favorite, the Merlot or the red blend between the two?
I hate to be asked that question because my standard answer is, well, what am I doing? If I'm having a big meal, Luchavo. But if I'm just hanging out, maybe just having some cheese and finger food with people, the Merlot possibly. Whatever. I have to know what I'm doing as to what I want to serve with it. I think both of them are wonderful, served with a meal or served with cheese or finger foods or just friends. Just to sit around and drink a bottle of wine. Yeah, I've been known to do that once or twice. But I really like the Merlot. It's funny, as I've gotten older, my palate has changed, and it likes it to be a little softer, a little more to the feminine side. And I just like the texture is very, very important to me. What is the texture of the wine? And the Merlot, yeah, it's got it going on. You know, good red, ripe red fruits. So I guess I just answered your question in a very roundabout way.
I was actually really
Merlot.
surprised the Merlot was quite smooth.
Yeah,
The blend, I expect the blend to be smooth, but the Merlot was, I mean, I honestly haven't drank a Merlot in a while. I was pretty impressed with it.
the Merlot is what got me to come back to drinking this brand of wine. When Columbia Crest first came out, they just were called Columbia Crest. It was called Grand Estates, and they didn't have the H3 right away. And eventually they came out with the H3. And the first time I tried it, I was like, wow, that is really good. It just was just the varietally correct, and it did exactly what I wanted it to do. It complemented my palate perfectly.
Well, the H3 is a child of Columbia Crest out of well, how does it work?
Well, Chateau Saint Michel has their own vineyards, and you know they were both wineries were started. We'll just say at the same time, but in two different locations, not being owned necessarily by the Columbia Crest by Chateau Saint Michel. Eventually, Chateau Saint Michel bought them and brought them into the fold, and things really changed after that. Little consolidation, I guess you could call it.
I just had a taste of the Merlot after it's been sitting here, and it almost has a liqueur kind of flavor.
It has more flavor. That could be it. The difference between the two is the Merlot tends, for me, to have more red fruit flavors, the raspberry, cherry, cranberry, those types of flavors, versus the Luchavo, which is a little bit bigger, with the addition of that Syrah and the Malbec. Syrah gives you a deeper flavor, I do believe, and Malbec tends to add almost a little bit of an iron type of a flavor to the wine itself. The Merlot is, that's my favorite, no doubt. But it's just my favorite. Everybody has their own, and then
Are there any other questions for Tim before we start to wrap this up? No?
Tim, since you like this H3, the Horse Heaven Hills, what other varietals are there that we should try? We see them.
from them, I think any of them that have the H3 on them, go for them. They don't produce a ton of different ones. I think I had it in here. There's a Chardonnay, there's the Cab, there's the Merlot, obviously, and Le Chabot. But after that, that's kind of it. There aren't a ton of them.
So maybe try the Cab if you want. Is it a real full-bodied Cab?
Yeah, the Cab is delicious also. Now, we're going to have the Cabernet tonight, but for some reason, the distributor has been out for a month or month and a half, and we just don't have any. So that's the only reason we didn't have the cab tonight.
Must be delicious if they're out.
Well, they're out of almost all of them right now. So if you can find them, and if you need to buy some, snap them up. We've got a few bottles here of the Luchavo and the Merlot, but not a lot. Not a lot. It should be in very soon. It's a big winery.
So, Tim, the red blend was in place of the cab?
No, the Pinot Gris was in place of the cab.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
And that's the only reason we were outside of the H3 label.
Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, Tim, so much for guiding us through this tasting.
Well, thank you all. It was my pleasure. I've never done this before. I've never spoken over a computer, so it was all new to me. Thank you all very much. And, I hope you invite me back again. Be happy to come back and do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great. And as I mentioned at the start of the call, I apologize for the technical difficulties with Jen's video, but the recording for this virtual tasting will be made available to you all in an email that will go out next week, which will also feature our October virtual tasting with Crown Republic, which will be on October 14th. So stay tuned for those details. And thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tim.
Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye-bye.